Fantasy football on deck, everybody. This is Austin, and we're going to do a fantasy football ESPN mock draft. So, in order to do that, let's go to the fantasy football main sign-in page. Let's go to the mock draft lobby up here. Let's scroll down and find a league that matches both your people's volume per league and also the scoring format. So, I'm a 12-team points per reception league. The snake draft, so 12 team head-to-head points per reception mock draft. Shoot. Darn it. 12 team points per reception mock draft. I joined this league, and I'm going to return to the lobby, and I looked like I got the 6th place spot, and that's great and fine. So, why is my YouTube page different? Why is my fantasy advice different? For the loyal people that are watching me from the fantasy baseball season that's still going on, and I give you guys luck, I'm still with you. Next video on fantasy baseball is going to come out here in a couple of days when it's more relevant, first week of the playoffs. So, going back to fantasy football, I think that it's really important to sort of note that I'm giving you guys advice. I'm using the same advice that I am giving you. I'm not kind of blowing smoke up your face. So let's go to sort of just kind of look at track record. Fantasy baseball, as you guys know, don't need to tout myself up and talk myself up too much, but outscored everybody by 1,000 points in this league. Finished first place regular season. And again, regular season first place finisher, and I was the best finisher by almost 1,000 points in this one. Far and over 1,000 points against everybody except the second place version. So a lot of success. I just want you guys to know again, of you that play fantasy baseball, a lot of you probably play fantasy football as I do, and similarly in fantasy football, using a lot of the same concepts. I have done really well. So over the last 4 years, this was me. I got to use the same emblem with the Santa Claus feature, and I have finished first place, and last season finished second place here. So again, really just hammering home that using a lot of the same tendencies as I do for drafting fantasy baseball. Again, I implement into fantasy football. And, if you guys are familiar, for the people who, were with me from the beginning, kind of my fantasy baseball, video that's gotten a decent amount of attention. I've had really good interactions with. It's going to be the same format. You're going to draft, but you're going to come prepared. You're going to have a cheat sheet spreadsheet that's not only has ranks on it, but it has reasonings next to the majority of the players, and kind of giving you a reason for why I do or do not like a player, instead of just sort of leaning on giving a factor opinion and not really backing it up. So that's my page. Has also in the comments below to this video, you guys again will have access to fantasy football's cheat sheet, or you can access the same cheat sheet through this link up here. So again, feel free to utilize the resource. And if you don't utilize my resource, make sure to do your own homework and make sure to come to these things prepared. You can't expect to win and set yourself up for success unless you prepare. So I've talked about sort of the past, and now I want to talk about specifically fantasy football and the differentiators and kind of like my concepts of like why I succeed compared to my peers. So my fantasy philosophy with baseball and football both is that it's really boiling it down to you have dependent players and you have independent players. And so a dependent player is someone generally in either sport who is one-dimensional, relies on scoring bonuses. So one-dimensional meaning in fantasy football, if you have a running back who doesn't catch any balls out of the backfield, just reliant on running yards, then most likely they will be dependent on a rushing touchdown in order to have an actual a good day at the office. Whereas an independent player would be catching balls out of the backfield, running, and it has a combination and an optimal opportunity to score in either way. So dependent player, one-dimensional, relies on scoring bonuses like touchdowns, and for fantasy baseball kind of like relies on wins. If you're a pitcher, it's like something that's kind of like out of your control. They're also like in order to own them, they've got to be super volume high. They have to have so much ball share and market share that they have the ball in their hands so often that like it makes up for their inefficiencies. So my first example that I kind of wanted to use, since it's an easy one, is like the first and second pick of this year's fantasy draft are scheduled to be either Jonathan Taylor and Christian McCaffrey. And you like in comparing these two guys, I obviously Jonathan Taylor's been one of the best running backs over the last couple of years. I am a Colts fan. Love Jonathan Taylor. He's got a great offensive line. But this is the reason, and I'm going to explain to you why he is in no way, shape, or form the fantasy prospect that Chris McCaffrey is. So if we just look at these stats here and sort of like the effort required, they are projected to score within this year 8 points of each other, with Jonathan Taylor rushing for almost 600 more yards than Chris McCaffrey. The difference is that because Chris McCaffrey is not only the best running back on their team, but also the best wide receiver on their team. He's a truly the most independent player. He is the Shohei Ohtani of the NFL in regards to fantasy. He is contributing from two ends of the field. He's a multiple of two. He's getting the market share for running back touches, and he's getting the most targets out of the backfield because he's also the team's best receiver. So though Jonathan Taylor is on a playoff team, has a really good offensive line, he is in no way, shape, or form better in any way than Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey just has to stay on the field, and that's kind of been the biggest knock against him, is just sort of a health thing. So that's kind of like it, just sort of like really depicting the difference between someone who has to work really hard to score a lot of points and someone who doesn't have to work nearly as hard because they're getting their points from two dimensions, being like, rushing and receiving in this regard, comparing Christian McCaffrey. So again, because it projects Jonathan Taylor to rush almost 600 more yards than Christian McCaffrey, but they're going to score just about the same because Christian McCaffrey has every opportunity to score, 1,000 yards rushing, 1,000 yards passing. Now, let me hit on independent players now. So again, as I kind of mentioned, independent players are two-dimensional. If it's a running back, it's catching balls out of the backfield, it's taking rushes. If it's a quarterback, it's not only the most independent differentiator is making sure that you have someone who is always every down looking to launch the ball down the field. And the second, thing that really makes a quarterback special is their ability to run. And I really shouldn't have to explain that super hard. But let's go over to make our draft selection here to see what's going on. So I've got the 6th pick overall, and my overall strategy so far is kind of using this sheet, and I'll get to the sheet eventually, has been pick the best available running backs back to back, except for the top 3 wide receivers. So I just immediately went against my own fortuity and draft plan right here, but this means I absolutely have to take a running back over the next 2 picks. Running backs are so scarce this year, and I might have just done something stupid here, but it's a draft. It's a mock draft. I'll do this. I'll carry the same thoughts into my own draft, but let's go back to independent variables. So sort of just making sure that the volume is maybe medium to high in comparison, but they're making the absolute most of their snaps and their snap share. So truly independent players. Every single play is an opportunity to really have like a big play. They separate themselves from their peers through athleticism, skill, volume, fill in the blank. But they just seem to require less effort to achieve that much more. So even just kind of, again, using really easy examples right here, Josh Allen is projected to not throw, basically like be outthrown by around 600 yards by Patrick Mahomes. And Patrick Mahomes is by no means a slouch in the run game. He's just not expected to run. Just the difference even of 300 yards rushing per year and Josh Allen being the number one goal line opportunist for the Buffalo Bills really differentiates him from Patrick Mahomes. And if he's able to get 600 plus yards rushing and this amount of touchdowns, it's just he is like the true differentiator at the quarterback position. The only other person that can match his level of productivity would be Lamar Jackson. So again, let's comparing like even like Josh Allen versus a Tom Brady. So Tom Brady had 5,316 yards last year. He finished the season. I got my girlfriend calling me. It's my pick in the draft. And here we are. So as I mentioned before, no running back scarcity is at basically the worst it's ever been. Absolutely have to go after running backs this year. I think Javonte Williams is by far and away the most talented of the available ones, and between him and James Conner. So I think Javonte Williams is the answer, and glad that I got that in there quick enough. So let's go again back sort of explaining the concepts of why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. So next, again, sort of just comparing Tom Brady and Josh Allen. Before Tom Brady almost has to play an absolute perfect game in order to match the same amount of stats. So Tom Brady, he has no rushing abilities. He might steal a couple QB sneak quarterback runs. But he is absolutely has to play 100% perfect, whereas the players that can run, the Josh Allens of the world, the Lamar Jacksons, can throw for thousands of yards less. And as long as they're able to produce in the running game, they're going to compete at the same level as Tom Brady. So kind of gives you just a little more of a buffer. Like if you're able to pull from two different stats, you're just able to produce at a more reliable level. So let's go to the actual sheet. And similarly to last year for fantasy baseball, I'm going to have everybody sort of highlighted out of like who I want and who I'm avoiding. And next, I am going to basically by round, I'm going to sort of like highlight who's available when. So like I'm going to have this sheet actually over on a separate screen here, as well as a depth chart, an NFL depth chart to make sure that I have, all of the available, starting running back situations, right, wide receiver situations. But you want to ensure that you know where people are depending on the position throughout this table, and sort of one of those things where if it gets to the point where I'm drafting and quarterbacks are maybe flying off the board, and I don't remember exactly who is where, I can look at that sheet immediately in real time and understand that there is, quarterbacks to come that I don't need to like reach for one now. So of the available running backs and people, again, utilizing my sheet, I'm going to see that, man, Josh Allen's overall the best quarterback. Wanted to get a second running back there, but the ones above, I think that Cam Akers is going to be very, very good, but also for whatever reason, fear that he might not get 100% of the run share. No one's going to get 100% of the run share. But Josh Allen is just by far and away the most is easiest choice early, only because he is expected to be their number one goal line threat. And he is looking to launch the ball down the field every single play, which you absolutely need from a fantasy football perspective. So again, utilizing this sheet just next to you as you go, you can kind of like anticipate and start queuing up players as you go. I've got pretty short descriptions of like why I think each person is where. But again, it's just one of those concepts of like, if you are in a bind and you're kind of in no man's land, you don't exactly know where you're going to go. You have a couple holes. You're able to look ahead and see like, man, if I really wanted Trey Lance as my backup quarterback, he's around a pick 100. And if I was at, in the 70s right now, then it'd make more sense for me to go after, one of the available like tight ends in this position, or, fill in the blank, whatever you need at that time. So actually, again, I'm going to minimize this over here so I can maximize my, my screen over this direction. But and off we go. Sorry I talked so much, but I think that's sort of important because, again, like if you're drafting in baseball, it's all about making sure that you have the most talented team because there is so much so much more value deeper in the draft, and it's sort of like a trade for trade or draft for trade assets second, because every single position contributes in baseball. The if a shortstop scores 300 points and a center fielder scores 300 points, they can basically be swapped evenly because each player gets however many at bats per game, fill in the blank. But given that and there's like less scarcity across positions, and there's a whole minor league system that fills throughout the year too. That's a whole other component for fantasy football. I really think that drafting talent to start is obviously like at the forefront of your brain, but drafting trade assets is almost as valuable as we go through this, just because you'll see kind of the scarcity and understanding like what's available, what can I get now, what can't I get later, and that's really what's going to drive my draft. And sort of like I've already went against my own rules. I should have, I'm still in a good spot, but you can already see like of the available running back, I have to take a running back right now. And of the available running backs, as I scroll down, I see that in the 40s, there's not much to work with, like in regards to market share. ETN, I'm going to come down and um, grabbed Miles Sanders for now. Just as an example, so Miles Sanders has the number one offensive line ranked in football. They're supposed to maul people. He doesn't have anyone competing necessarily for his job. This is why I went for Miles Sanders. But you can already tell the difference between quality wide receivers and super quality running backs. So you've got your DK Metcalf still, your Sutton, again, you can kind of sort of see you've got top 15 talent in the wide receiver class still here, and it's going to be continuous like that for the rest of the draft in comparison to your available running backs who Breece Hall is going to split carries. J.K. Dobbins is absolutely the most athletic and like best running back on that roster, but he also his health is a concern. So like how much is he going to play throughout the beginning of the season? If it ends up being one of those things that they slow play him in, that's way better than the other direction, pushing them too fast. So you can sort of see that like the running backs, the talent of the running backs run out way quicker than any of the other positions. Next, as I get around, I have to either go running back or tight end, depending on who's available. So again, like using this tool, I can see that, up here in a couple of picks, I've got George Kittle coming up. That's a solid direction to go. After that's Lamar Jackson, but he's already gone. And this is like if people get drafted in picks before you're ready for them to be gone, you can sort of foresee and look for the individuals that you like. So I really like Antonio Gibson and Cordell Patterson, these 80s numbers. Even though again, I want a running back now who's available. And Josh Jacobs, from a volume perspective, I don't think he's necessarily the most talented of the bunch, but it's between that and maybe even like a starting tight end like Darren Waller. So Darren Waller has got to be the best tight end left available. They're super scarce when they go Darren Waller. And again, feel bad about not getting a running back right there again, but at least I'm filling up starting position spots. So really just keep hammering running backs, even though I've gone against that just about every time that it's come up as an opportunity. Always be queuing people, kind of keeping up with who's where doing what. Again, I sort of talked about like once we get into this little pocket right here where there's Antonio Gibson, Cordell Patterson, Tony Pollard in the 80s. After that, there's almost no super reliable running backs, positions. So you really have to load up on them early. And again, trading in football, you almost have to draft to trade. You have to almost draft for trade assets in order to really get ahead. And my example last year is I drafted Dak Prescott as my second quarterback. so early. I drafted Raheem Mostert, who was supposed to be the starter for San Francisco last year, as like my fourth running back, and I traded both of those players to a team who had Baker Mayfield as their projected starting quarterback and almost no starting running backs on that roster. So they took a loss in volume, and I gained at that time, a top 25 player. I think he was a top 15 player, DeAndre Hopkins last year. So it's like I used my pick number 60 and my pick number 120 to acquire a top 15 pick immediately before the season started. And then I eventually used Hopkins to trade for Justin Jefferson and Christian McCaffrey and stuff throughout the year. But it's really setting yourself apart in the very beginning with just people that don't, like players that just don't exist in abundance. So right now I'm hoping to goodness that Devin Singletary sits. But if Devin Singletary doesn't sit, which he's currently ranked at 61, I can see over here on my index has just changed even since yesterday a little bit. But I can see that besides Devin Singletary, again, in this 80 range, there are a couple running backs that I want, but Devin Singletary should be like the number one guy getting carries on a really good offense. Offensive line's a little poor, but they're just going to be scoring so much and having the ability to score that, no one's going to really rival him. So I'm going to collect Devin Singletary, and I'm really happy about that. Of these players available in front of me, all dependent. None of these guys necessarily super interested in. So again, like a guy like Darnell Mooney, regardless of what his separation is, the second worst offensive line in football belongs to the Chicago Bears. And, regardless, he's just not going to get balls thrown his way in any value. If he's going to catch balls, they're going to be short. It's not going to have enough time to develop anything downfield. Regardless of how good of an athletic of a player he is, he's just not going to have the opportunity to succeed. So this would be a dependent player. He'd need a touchdown to have a good day for most of the time. Christian Kirk, I think it's just fairly laughable that he got the contract that he did, given that he's just been sort of a track spinner down the sidelines for the last couple of years. In Arizona, he's always been like a fairly okay contributor, but has never been a number one or even a number two really wide receiver. Instead of me giving you player evaluations, which you already probably know, I'm just going to keep nose to the grindstone. Let's go down and keep highlighting players that we'd be happy to take. This early in the draft, there's no reason to settle for people that you don't want. Each of these quarterbacks, I'm probably going to try to grab at very least one of them in my second pick, assuming that if Cordell Patterson can survive, then I'm going to for sure go Cordell Patterson, assuming I don't understand why he is so low given the amount of target shares that he gets out of the backfield. He's a truly independent player because he is the best wide receiver on that roster. He just also happens to line up at the running back position. So, as we see and as I appreciate, Cordell Patterson, running back out of Atlanta, bad offensive line, can't necessarily run the ball a ton, but because he's lining up at running back, but also slotting out to receiver and their packages, he's almost irreplaceable. I can't believe that he's down at 96 given how successful he was last year. So Cordell Patterson, and I'm super happy about that. So if we look at my roster so far, I already have 1, 2, 3, 4 starting running backs. And are they super pretty? Honestly, no. I don't have to be the first person to tell you that those aren't the absolute most talented guys. They're in favorable situations, but at the end of the draft, we'll go see kind of what teams did, and the teams that went and drafted 2 or even freaking 3 wide receivers in the very beginning are going to be so desperate to grab any sort of starting running backs that I would be able to scalp them for these later used picks for one of their more quality guys just because they misplanned. So And I'm going to keep scrolling. It's smart to just keep going through and keep highlighting players as you go, to ensure that you're setting yourself up for success. So, kind of where I sit right now, I am looking at all of these quarterbacks. I have a suspended DeAndre Hopkins down there, and I have a starting Rashard Penny and a Trey Lance. So I'm set on quarterback. I'm never going to take out whatchamacallit. So just overall ceiling and tradability. I went DeAndre Hopkins. He's suspended, I think, for the first 8 games. It doesn't matter. He's going to sit on my bench, and that's fine. If anything, that's just guaranteeing that I'm going to have a healthy individual for the final X amount of games this season. So I don't necessarily ever fear drafting guys that are suspended for this beginning portion, especially if it's something like steroids that is only just going to guarantee that they are going to be healthy rolling into the year, which is one of the the biggest things, as with fantasy football. So we are 80 and down. So kind of continuing with these player highlights. So if I go down to 103, which Trey Lance has already dropped significantly since yesterday. They update these way quicker than you can ever keep up with them. I'd hand type all of this, which is stupid, but ESPN doesn't allow you to download their lists into spreadsheet form. So here we are. Again, can you continue? Just kind of looking to the side here. Trey Lance apparently runs like a 4.5 40. Did not realize that he's expected to rush for. They expect him to rush for over 500 yards this season, which is wild. If that's the case, this is probably one of the easier RB2 selections that you could take. Obviously, there's a lot of really quality quarterbacks like Aaron Rodgers flew off the board. If it's between Matthew Stafford and Trey Lance, you know what you're going to get from Matthew Stafford. He's going to be a top 15 guy, almost guaranteed, but he's going to be one-dimensional. And obviously, he's willing to launch the ball down the field, and that's what we want out of our quarterbacks. But given that Trey Lance is expected to rush for almost 500 yards in a really good offense, that succeeded without him, his ceiling just becomes wildly high in comparison to these other fast quarterbacks that we're drafting super early. So Trey Lance is my second quarterback. Is super awesome, and I don't want Allen Lazard. I don't know why he got queued. But just continuing down, I have already, I don't really need to look over at this sheet because I've already, done it enough times. I know that, DJ Shark's supposed to be the second wide receiver on Detroit with a really good offensive line and a good run game. As well, and even if they're behind in games, he should get a lot of opportunities. I think of all of the Kansas City wide receivers, Sky Moore has maybe the biggest upside because it's an unknown. I don't really believe in Juju Smith-Schuster to get the separation that that he used to for one season. Even though Patrick Mahomes is throwing to him, I don't think he's necessarily the answer. So here I am again. I have collected 4 starting running backs. And given that I've got 2 starting wide receivers, let's just look at the talent that's available. I'm using my sheet, already done in the defenses and such. Who's the true differentiator? Who has the biggest upside? Again, I think it's between Shark and Sky Moore. And just given that Shark can't seem to stay healthy, we'll go with the kid that's playing with Patrick Mahomes. And Raheem Mostert is currently set as the number 2 running back on Miami's roster, who has the offensive coordinator from San Francisco over the last couple of years as their head coach now. And I think that Mostert by far and away is more athletic and better running back overall than Chase Edmonds. So I think that he's undervalued where he is. But, as you go along with these things, some people like players, whatever. I think that Raheem Mostert will greatly outproduce his 149 rank overall. And if he somehow exists and survives until my next pick, then that's who I will go with. Robbie Anderson, I think I'll have a big uptick with an improvement in quarterback. And somehow he survived. So Miami had a historically horrible offensive line last year, though they've improved marginally. I think that he, just from a carry and market share perspective, he's the most athletic guy on roster. And again, if he ends up taking up most of the running back carries in Miami, he becomes wildly more valuable than 149. So I'm happy to take Raheem Mostert as my 5th starting running back. There are probably teams, and I know it's auto draft, but there are probably teams in this draft right now that have yet to take their 2nd or 3rd running back. So again, me having 5 starting running backs is really, really key, and something that I do every single year to ensure that I'm able to succeed via trading people. And again, that 149 pick right there, combined with maybe another player at a position that someone's weak at, combines to be, maybe a top 50 pick because someone just didn't plan accordingly. So I have Robbie Anderson as one of my, happy to draft given the situation. And again, he's going to have an uptick in production with a better quarterback, and I need another receiver. So Robbie Anderson, and I'm happy about that. So down in the 160s, do not take a freaking kicker until your very last pick. I don't need to talk anymore about why that's a stupid option. So I've got 2 bench spots. I need a defense and a kicker, and ideally I just use one defense. Grab as much value as you can. The number 1 kicker and number 1 defense will probably be available in free agency over the first 3 weeks before people buy in. So unless it's one of the true differentiators and defenses, that's not who you want. So they're saying that I should take a kicker, and that's not what I want. But I know that Julio Jones is down here, and Alex Pierce is down here at 177. So even though things have flexed around a little bit, I know that the true opportunity for ceiling on one of the best offenses in football, I don't expect him to do anything for me, but just the idea of grabbing value and even grabbing him as a trade asset, the anticipation for when he does play will generate more value than me grabbing one of the top kickers at this point, because kicker is it's a truly dependent position where you can't predict anything that comes along with it. So never grab a kicker until the very, very last pick. It's silly this is stupid. They're not going to be more valuable than even like Madison is. So as I look down, I kind of there's some more value. There's some extra value picks down here. But I think that the most bang for my buck available player left is either going to be Madison or Alex Pierce. I've got one more bench spot left. Don't care about the kickers, obviously, as I've already mentioned. I think that Alec Pierce as the number 2 receiver with Indianapolis has the biggest upside of any of the receivers there. I know that Michael Pittman Jr. Jumped up a lot this season, but I think that Alec Pierce overall is a more athletic guy. He had the highest broad jump and vertical jump of anybody in his class, and he is truly, I think, an individual, independent differentiator in his ball in the air skills. I don't think that there's been a big body like him in Indianapolis in a long time, and I think that he'll be really utilized, in short yardage, especially towards the goal line. So I don't think that, again, I think that he's an independent player because he's going to be valuable all across the field and not touchdown dependent. I think that he's going to be super valuable in the short, intermediate, and long routes because of his size and his ability to beat one-on-one coverage and out-muscle one-on-one coverage. So next, I've got 1-2 spots left, defense and kicker. This is truly... defense is the only choice here. It's kind of a crapshoot, but I expect, as always, the Patriots are going to be solid. The Rams always have a ton of talent on defense. There was only 3 defenses that I truly loved this season, and they're obviously all gone. So I'm going to go overall like talent in the division and consistency. You can always depend on a Bill Belichick defense to not commit penalties and overall produce. So who is left, and why do we wait till the very last pick to grab a kicker? Well, we wait till the very last pick to grab a kicker because of who's available. Plenty of awesome opportunities. So I generally like to go after dome kickers just to limit on the variation in weather. So like, you'd have to have a situation where, the Bills and the Patriots play last year and it's a Monday night game. You waited to play either your Bills or your New England kicker, and there's like 80-mile-an-hour winds. There was no throwing. They ran every play. Therefore, in kicking, they didn't even try field goals, extra points, because the wind was so high. So if you can avoid outside altogether, that's ideal. But I think that given, Los Angeles Chargers and how much points they're supposed to score, always be putting themselves into a favorable situation. Same thing with Tampa Bay. Warm weather, maybe less favorable weather conditions, but either is going to be an easy pick given this point. And, who cares? Essentially, it's a kicker. They're going to do their best just based on, what their situation is. So since now that we're, rounding out this draft, again, really focusing on players who can contribute in two different variations, and overall own market share, aren't splitting a lot of time. So eventually it's going to give me my recap. But I think that, again, there's two quarterbacks to for sure own this year, and if you're going to go after two, it's going to be Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. They just have to work so much less. They don't have to be as perfect to be a top 5 guy because they have the ability to utilize their legs and contribute that way. Again, draft running backs early. Running backs run out so quickly. So I can maybe check and see what other teams did. So if I expand my screen completely and I go after, I wonder if it's not going to show me. Okay. Here we go. So if I look at running backs, Taylor, Barkley, that's probably not my person, and Mitchell, probably not my person. McCaffrey, Dobbins, Pierce, not my person. Eckler, Connor, not my person. Nick Chubb. So all these people did pretty well. Najee Harris, Montgomery, Etienne, a little more favorable. Swift, Akers, Cook. So he only has 2 starting running backs overall, and he has a fairly loaded wide receiver room. So the Shamel team would be fairly easy to trade with. Jacobs, Fournette, only 2, 3. So it has an okay situation at running back. Breece Hall and Michael, this is the team. This is absolutely the team. So Breece Hall and Michael Carter, they're both Jets. They're going to split carries, and they're on the same team. Let's look across where his other picks are. So he's got Jamar Chase, Michael Pittman Jr., Mark Andrews, Hunter Renfrow, a lot of Justin Herbert. Picks across the board, but he did not go after running back, and this is what can happen. If you don't go after running back super early, he uses 3 of his first picks on non-running backs, 4 of his first picks on non-running backs, and this is what happens. You get both Jets running backs, and maybe an auto pick did this to him or her, but this is the kind of situation. This is a player that I would absolutely target to pull, one of his more valuable guys off for not as much. Yeah, that's pretty low cost overall. I think similarly with this team, he's got 2. This person has 2 running backs overall. Joe Mixon, I think, is going to be really dependable. Clyde Edwards-Helaire has not been a productive player at this point in his career. And at this point, there's no other starting running backs on this roster. So this is also another team to target to maybe scalp one of their more valuable receivers or, maybe even a quarterback or something like that, depending on your situation. These guys, running backs, also kind of suck. He's got Ezekiel Elliott, who's going to be splitting 50-50 with Tony Pollard. So that might be another team to go after. And this is pretty obvious too. So though I love Tony Pollard, you don't want him to be your second option running back. Alvin Kamara is is great. I think he's a top 5 guy every year. But besides that, there's no depth at running back. You can see how easy it would be for me to use one of my 5th, 4th running backs on my roster, plus maybe a fairly good receiver to pull up, one of his more, quality players at a position that he's deeper in. So that's the end of my show. Really appreciate your guys' time, and good night. Go Colts.